title, AIA, for buying an extra airline seat and actually using it, even though I don't technically need it. Verdict, not the asshole. I absolutely hate flying. Not in a planes are going to fall out of the skyway, but in a this entire experience makes my skin crawl way. I will happily drive 1,015 hours rather than take a 4-hour flight. The whole process just grinds me down. The security theater, the lines, the rushing, the boarding chaos, and then finally getting crammed into a tiny seat that leaves me sore for days. Because of that, I basically have one rule. I only fly if I can buy a second seat. If my wife is with me, I'll buy a third, so we have the whole row. I'm a big guy, but I'm not so big that I physically require two seats. I fit in one just fine. But mentally, it's a different story. That extra seat makes all the difference. It lets me stretch my legs out a bit, shift around, and not feel like I'm trapped in a metal tube with strangers pressed up against me. I don't have to be shoulder to shoulder with someone who wants to talk my ear off, or someone who's spilling over the armrest, or someone who's furious that I exist because I dared to recline my seat 2 inches. Having that buffer calms me down enough that I can actually tolerate being on the plane. Weirdly, the second seat is almost always cheaper than upgrading to business or first class. And for some reason, if the flight isn't full, the airline usually refunds the cost of the extra seat anyway. So from my perspective, it's the best of both worlds. I get the space I need, and sometimes I even get some of the money back. Here's where the conflict comes in. Every time I fly like this, the gate agents and flight attendants are confused. They look at me, look at the boarding pass, and you can see the gears turning. I've had more than one gate agent say something like, "You're not nearly big enough to need two seats," in this kind of half-joking, half-judgmental tone. I usually just shrug it off and say, "I know, I just prefer the extra space," and move on. But once I'm on the plane, it becomes a whole thing more often than you'd think. On multiple flights, I've had to argue with flight attendants and random passengers who assume that the empty seat next to me is up for grabs. A few times, the flight has been oversold, or there's been a last-minute standby passenger, or a very large person who clearly does need more space but didn't buy an extra seat. Suddenly, my paid-for seat becomes the solution to the airline's problem. One time, a flight attendant came over and said, "We're full, so we're going to need to seat someone here," and pointed to my extra seat. I told her, "No, I paid for that seat." She looked surprised and said something like, "But you don't need two seats." I repeated, calmly, "I paid for it. I'm using it." She gave me that tight smile and walked away, but I could feel her annoyance. Another time, there was a guy who had to be at least 400 pounds, squeezed into the middle seat next to a very small woman who looked absolutely miserable. He was clearly overflowing into her space, and she kept shifting and trying to lean away. A flight attendant came over, looked at them, then looked at my empty seat, and I could see where this was going. She asked if I would be willing to give up my extra seat so the larger guy could have more room. I said no, that I had paid for both seats and I needed the space. She pushed back, saying, "He really needs it more than you do." I told her, if he needs two seats, he should have bought two seats. I did. That's not my problem. The woman next to him gave me this pleading look, and I did feel bad for her. But at the same time, I had spent a lot of money specifically to avoid being in a cramped, uncomfortable situation. If I was willing to fly with one seat, I wouldn't have bought a second one in the first place. This kind of scenario has happened 6 or 7 times now. Sometimes it's a flight attendant, sometimes it's a gate agent, and sometimes it's another passenger who thinks I'm being selfish for not sharing the seat I paid for. I've had strangers tell me I'm lucky to have the extra space and that I should do the right thing and give it up. I've also had people mutter under their breath about how some people have more money than sense. For the record, I don't do this on trains or buses. I never take up two seats there. They're usually more comfortable. You can stand up and move around, and I don't get that same trapped, panicky feeling. Planes are just different for me. It's not about flexing money or being a jerk. It's about managing my own comfort and sanity in a situation I already hate. I've never actually backed down. Every time this comes up, I hold my ground and keep the extra seat. I paid for it, I booked it in advance, and I'm not breaking any rules. But after the last flight, where a guy loudly called me an asshole for hogging space while someone else was suffering, it got in my head a bit. So, am I the asshole for refusing to give up the extra seat I paid for, even when someone else might need it more than I do?